What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Ticket with Tippett. I'm Gavin Tippett, and today we're going to be going through snap percentages, target shares, and rushing attempt splits in the entire NFL every game, week one. I'm going to let you know what I see from these numbers, and then I'm also going to give you waiver wire pickups, and we're going to talk about that Tank Bigsby trade. We're going to talk about the George Kittle injury, the Xavier Worthy injury. What do these things mean going into week two of the NFL season? And how can you improve your fantasy team? Let's jump in. Jumping into our first game of the week, the Washington Commanders versus the New York Giants, and Washington pretty much dominated this game. There were no real major storylines coming out of this game. It was very one-sided. Washington controlled the ball for a majority of the game. But there's something pretty interesting. Obviously, JCM, Big Bill on Capitol Hill, we all know who he is at this point. He got the most carries on the team. It shows right here 10 carries, 50% of the rush attempts. That's not including Jaden Daniels, obviously. So, out of the running back room, he did get the most carries and he produced the best output. He had 8.2 yards per carry when he touched the football. Now, if we move to snap counts, Austin Eckler dominated 47% to 32, 33 ish for JCM. Jeremy McNichols did have a little bit of the workload, especially inside the 5 yard line. He took every single snap inside the 5. That was a rush attempt. And Chris Rodriguez was a scratch. He was healthy scratch, so he didn't even play a factor in the game. And this one's pretty clear. Austin Eckler was the primary target back out of the backfield. So expect for Eckler to play a lot of that passing down work, but expect for JCM to probably take a huge role heading into weeks 3, 4. So if he's available in your league, you have to go get him now. If he's not available, you could try and make a trade for him and buy low, because I'm sure that fantasy managers are pretty upset that he didn't get more touches, being that he was so efficient. Another thing to note on, Deebo Samuel looks like he has great rapport with Jaden Daniels, so just be on the lookout for that. If you have Deebo Samuel, he is a flex start from now on. 7 catches, 77 yards, and a 19-yard rushing touchdown to go along with it. He looks like he's going to be a staple in this Cliff Kingsbury offense, so be on the lookout for Deebo as well. All right, the next team, obviously, is the Giants, played against Washington. Washington pretty much dominated this run game from the start. The Giants could never get anything going on offense, but I want you to look at this number right here, the snap percentage for Tyrone Tracy Jr. 73.5% of the team's snaps were taken by Tyrone Tracy out of the backfield. That is a massive number. Kyren Williams sits at 65%. So for Tyrone Tracy to be at 75-ish% is absolutely absurd. He is the clear running back one. They don't see much in Singletary or Scatterbo, and it's pretty obvious. If they get a more favorable matchup heading into future weeks, Tyrone Tracy is a flex option easily. And even the rush attempt numbers show it. 67% of the rushes went to Tyrone Tracy, while the other 33% goes between Devin Singletary and Cam Scatterbo. So there's just no question. Tyrone Tracy is the clear RB1 here in this New York Giants offense, and that's not going to change. Nothing crazy out of the wide receiver room. Just going to touch on it real quick. Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson are probably going to struggle because Russell Wilson is that quarterback. Until Jackson Dart comes in and they get a more mobile quarterback that's able to make more plays, I don't know how Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson get any touches and valuable targets. Although Wan'Dale did play, I think, like 80% of the snaps. Slayton played quite a bit in this game. Wan'Dale played mainly out of the slot, but Wan'Dale was the best target getter in that offense outside of Malik Neighbors. He's going to be that guy that if you have a couple injuries on your team, you can throw Wan'Dale Robinson in. He's going to get you like 10 fantasy points, and he's a great floor play. All right, moving on to the New York Jets versus Pittsburgh. This game was so back and forth. It was an awesome game to watch. If you didn't watch it, go back and watch the highlights because this game was absolutely insane. And we're going to start it with the running back room in New York. Breece Hall completely dominated this running back room. Braylon Allen had almost no say in what was going on. Breece Hall had 70% of carries and a ton of yards in this game. The snap percentage was split up between Braylon Allen and Breece Hall, but I think Breece Hall really set the mark for what this running back room is going to look like in the future. And out of the wide receiver room, there's nothing to even go with. Garrett Wilson is the number one guy, and there's nobody else really in this wide receiver room that's going to make a difference for you on your fantasy team. But someone I do have to apologize to is Justin Fields. I'm sorry. I doubted you. I didn't think you were going to be a good fantasy option, especially in this struggling New York Jets offense that had Aaron Rodgers in it and struggled. But you went out there, you balled out, you played against a good defense, and you played great. So props to you. I probably won't doubt you in the future, especially against some softer defenses than Pittsburgh. Now let's move on to the Pittsburgh side of the ball. Something that I found really interesting is that Kenneth Gainwell is just annoying again. He was annoying when Miles Sanders was good in Philadelphia, and he's annoying now when you have Caleb Johnson and Jalen Warren as the starting running backs for what we thought. I think a little bit of the game script and the fact that it was such a shootout. Kenneth Gainwell played more. He's the pass down back, obviously. But Caleb Johnson having 0 targets and 1 carry on the game is absolutely absurd. This is not what anybody was expecting when they drafted Caleb Johnson in like the 7 to 9 round area. If you have Caleb Johnson, don't drop him quite yet. We're not picking up Kenneth Gainwell over Caleb Johnson. Keep Caleb Johnson on your team. He's just going to have to sit there and wait. And if he rots, he rots. And eventually we'll dump him. But you have to keep him on your team. He's too good of a player. I do not know why he didn't play. But Jalen Warren now becomes that premium option in Pittsburgh. Now let's look at the target share in the wide receiver room in Pittsburgh. It was pretty clear. DK Metcalf, Calvin Austin, those were the only 2 to get targets. Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth in the tight end room were also pretty high on their target share. So it is just a 2-man show in the wide receiver room, and it's a 2-headed monster at tight end for Pittsburgh. Now, Indianapolis versus Miami. I will touch on Daniel Jones in a second and just talk about how great he was. The first thing I want to talk about is Josh Downs and Alec Pierce and their roles in this offense. As far as team snap percentage and target goes, Alec Pierce outpaced Josh Downs, and Josh Downs played primarily the slot role. So Alec Pierce is that number 2 outside receiver, and Michael Pittman is the clear number 1. I mean, just taking a look at their target share, yes, Josh Downs saw the same amount, but Alec Pierce is the outside wide receiver. He just didn't see a ton of targets because Michael Pittman was open all the time because Miami's secondary is so bad. And Adonai Mitchell actually took a couple targets away from Josh Downs playing the slot role. Now let's talk about the running back room. DJ Giddens looked like he got a lot of touches based off of this chart right here. 39% of the rushes went to DJ Giddens, but that is because Jonathan Taylor didn't have to play in the fourth quarter. Indianapolis was beating Miami so bad, which is insane to say. They were beating them so bad that DJ Giddens came in and took majority of the carries in the fourth quarter. Jonathan Taylor saw nothing. That is why this number is that close. If you're in a deep league, DJ Giddens is a good little handcuff. He seemed like he was pretty efficient somewhat for a backup running back. So, good handcuff. This offense looks to be better than what we thought it was going to be with Daniel Jones at quarterback, but Jonathan Taylor is the bell cow, and there's no question about that. And now talking about Daniel Jones, congratulations, Daniel Jones. You have won the Sam Darnold of the Year award. You are going to come back and you're going to make this team look better than it is. And then you're going to go somewhere else probably and get a crazy contract because the team thinks that you're so much better than what you were in New York, which you might be, but now you're just in a system and a coaching philosophy that helps you get better at football. New York Giants, take note, get rid of Brian Dable. And as far as Miami goes, I don't know what the overall option is. Mike McDaniel should be on the hot seat. This dude hasn't produced an offense that has Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, and Jalen Waddle on it. Got rid of Jonnu Smith for what reason, I don't know, because Jonnu Smith was the only damn thing working in that Miami offense last season. So we get rid of Jonnu. Tua looks like he's still in concussion protocol. Tyreek Hill is throwing temper tantrums on the sideline, and Jalen Waddle's getting hurt every single time he walks out on that football field. What is happening in Miami? I don't know, but the only reliable fantasy option is Devon Achane. He is the only option in this offense to be reliable in fantasy this season. Watch what I say. Cincinnati and Cleveland. Cincinnati got off to another slow start, but I want you to look at something here. The rush attempt for the running back room, Samaje Perine and Taj Brooks were absolutely horrendous in this category. Chase Brown took every single rush attempt out of that running back room. Samaje played a little bit of the passing down role in the third down game, but Chase Brown was the only running back to get touches in this game. And as far as wide receiver goes, obviously we know Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Andre Iosivas. We know who those 3 wide receivers are. We know they're going to touch the football all the time. However, at tight end, we have a 3-way tie pretty much at tight end. Drew Sample, Noah Fant, Mike Gesicki. They all played significant snaps, and they all played different roles. Gesicki and Fant were in on red zone drives, Drew Sample played a lot of the running game, which is why he played 69% of the snaps because Chase Brown was pretty dominant on the ground for the game. So just something to keep an eye on. I don't think any of these guys are startable in fantasy. I think you need to keep them on your bench if one gets hurt or they'll be in the waiver wire to stash later in the season. But do not start these guys. We don't know what's happening in this tight end room. Now, a running back room that's going to get pretty interesting. Cleveland, Dylan Sampson was the best running back in that room by far. They just tried to keep force feeding Jerome Ford for some reason. The rushing attempts went heavily in Dylan Sampson once Cleveland realized what was happening and that Dylan Sampson was the better running back because Jerome Ford got a lot of touches in the first quarter, and then that was pretty much it for the rest of the game. As you can see, the snap count for Jerome Ford was very high, but once they found out Sampson was the better of the two, he jumped up in snap count play by play pretty much. And then looking at the running back targets out of the pass game, Dylan Sampson 8 catches on 8 targets, and he had like 65 yards receiving. So he shared 18% of that team target share. Joe Flacco loves dumping it off to his running backs. Even when Quinshon Judkins comes back, Dylan Sampson is going to be the pass catching back. So in PPR leagues, he is a great flex play stash to have on your team. Now, I want you to look at this right here. Harold Fannin. He is a tight end on Cleveland. He's the backup tight end, but he played 29% of the slot. And he also had a 20% team target share. So they were playing a lot of 2 tight end sets and Harold Fannin in the slot. He got a screen pass and a rush attempt. So Kevin Stefanski is trying to get Harold Fannin the football. If you have George Kittle and he got hurt, Harold Fannin is absolutely on your waiver wire. Make that your number one priority waiver wire pickup because he is trying to be found in Cleveland. Now let's talk about New England versus Las Vegas. A very weird game for 2 rookie running backs and completely opposite in their roles and how they were used. So for New England, we have Ramondre Stevenson taking 54% of the rushing attempts and Trayvon Henderson taking about 38%. So kind of what we expected. We expected for week 1, week 2, week 3. We expect Ramondre Stevenson to be annoying and just take some of those carries away from Trayvon Henderson, especially near the goal line. We kind of expect that. We're not dumb, we know what we're doing when it comes to the season and what Trayvon Henderson is on this team. Now, if we move to snap count, this is where it gets a little worrisome. Ramondre did outsnap him by like 30%. That's not great, and that's not what we want to see. So if Trayvon starts to pick it up, then I'll feel a little bit more comfortable. But right now, I feel a little uncomfortable with how many snaps Ramondre did take. And then looking at the targets, obviously Trayvon, we knew he was the pass catching back, and he caught 100% of his passes on 13% target share. So great numbers there. We just have to see Trayvon get more snaps and even out that snap count with Ramondre, and then we'll feel a little bit more comfortable as the season goes on. Now, something that worries me with Stefon Diggs, he played 40% of the snaps. So he wasn't the number 1 snap getter, not the number 2, not number 3. He was the number 4 snap count player in the wide receiver room. Kayshon Boutte absolutely lit it up. Demario Douglas got a ton of targets. Drake May was just inaccurate every single time he was throwing it to him, other than the touchdown catch. They all shared about the same target share, except for Mac Hollins. He didn't really see anything. So when Stefon Diggs was on the field, he was getting a ton of targets. Kayshon Boutte, though, is the number 1 receiver in that team out of the slot. Now, as we said, 2 completely different roles for these rookie running backs. Ashton Jeanty was the lead getter in team snap percentage by far in that running back room at 86%. That is an absurd number. So now we just got to expect more efficiency from Ashton Jeanty. And looking at the targets that they got, the dump off passes that were made, Ashton Jeanty got both targets out of the running back room. So he is the clear RB1 in this room. Now, looking at the wide receiver snap count, obviously Jakobi Meyer dominated this. But surprisingly, Jack Bech didn't get much. We heard a lot of rave from beat reports and training camp and OTAs that Jack Bech was going to have a bigger role. Trey Tucker and Dante Thornton just separated themselves in this wide receiver room. And you can see that with the snap percentage, Trey Tucker being at 90.5% and Dante Thornton being that big red zone target coming in those key roles and those deep balls at 60.3% of the team snaps. And the target share shows that Jakobi Meyers dominated. We clearly knew that coming into the season. And then Dante Thornton and Trey Tucker both had about a 10% target share in this offense, being that their other option in targets is none other than Brock Bowers. But Michael Mayer, sharing a 10%, 12% target share each week, is going to cut into that wide receiver room. If Brock Bowers gets hurt, Michael Mayer is a clear start at tight end. He's talented enough It's just that Brock Bowers is in front of him, and there's nothing he can do about that. The running back room in Tampa Bay, there's not much to talk about. Bucky Irving dominated both the pass game and the run game. It wasn't even close. He had 83% of the rushes. Rachaad White is completely a handcuff if Bucky gets hurt. Now, moving to the wide receiver room, we knew who the third wide receiver was going to be. It was going to be Sterling Shepard playing that slot now that Chris Godwin's out and Jalen McMillan. But Emeka Egbuka and Mike Evans obviously dominated the team snap percentage. And then if we move to target share, Egbuka and Sterling Shepard shared the same target share, but Egbuka was more efficient when it comes to catch percentage, all that kind of stuff. They both shared 6 targets. Egbuka caught the 2 touchdowns. Obviously, Baker's looking for him in the red zone. And Mike Evans obviously got 25% of the target share. He just didn't produce a big day. And Cade Otton, somebody I was really high on coming into the season, especially if McMillan and Godwin were going to miss time, he didn't do jack squat. He got 0 catches on 3 targets. Did have a 10% team target share, so if he catches some of those footballs and one ends up being a red zone, he's a waiver wire pickup. Drop him if you have him. I don't know what happened compared to last season when he did go crazy when Chris Godwin left. Maybe Egbuka and Bucky Irving took a lot more of that role than Cade Otton will. So drop Cade Otton, pick up another tight end like a Harold Fannin or somebody we're going to talk about soon here in a Jawan Johnson. So we'll see what happens throughout the season, but it doesn't look good for Cade Otton. Now moving on to Atlanta. So this was a somewhat of a shootout game that didn't produce the points that we thought a shootout game would look for. And everybody got so worried about Tyler Algier taking carries away from Bijan Robinson, but I don't think we should be that worried. Bijan still outsnapped him 83% to 25. They were on the field at the same point at some times, so that's why that number's over 100% combined. But the guy you should be paying most attention to, and I'm not doing this as a joke, Kyle Pitts, we need to pay attention to him. If Darnell Mooney ever misses time again, Kyle Pitts is like the guy to go for in the red zone and in the pass game for third and intermediate. It wasn't Drake London, it was Kyle Pitts. As you can see here, he had a 20% target share and an 87.5 catch percentage. So he was the clear target for Michael Penix when Michael Penix felt like he was in trouble. And now moving on to Arizona against New Orleans. We're going to start with Arizona's running back room, something pretty interesting. James Conner took majority of the snaps, which we expected. But if we move over to the running back rushing attempts, you can see that that's pretty even. That's 60 to 40. James Conner obviously led a little bit, but Trey Benson was more efficient on the ground. James Conner in the target game, he became the pass catching back, and Trey Benson became the bruiser running back that James Conner has been for a majority of his career. So this looks like it's going to be more of a split backfield, something that I wasn't really expecting, being that Trey Benson was pretty much non-existent last year and James Conner took all the work. I thought that was going to happen again. They just gave him a contract extension, but it looks like they're going to try and incorporate Trey Benson into this offense more and more as the season goes on. And as far as the receiver room goes, we know who it is. It's Marvin Harrison. It's Michael Wilson. We're not expecting too much. Marvin had a great game. He had an 83% catch rate and 20% of the target share. So great numbers there. Him and Kyler look like they were on a much better basis and understanding of each other throughout this game. So we'll see how that goes moving on through the season. Now, in the New Orleans side of things, there's only 2 people I want to talk about. One is Alvin Kamara, which we'll touch on real quick. He was the only option out of the backfield. So stick with Alvin Kamara. He has a tough matchup heading into week 2, so be careful with that. But Alvin Kamara is the clear guy in the backfield. I hope he gets to a freaking team that will be a winning team that he can join and produce and give them a pass catching back. Hopefully we see that at some point and before his career ends, because I don't want to see him rot in New Orleans. The second name is a tight end that I know is on your waiver wire, Jawan Johnson. He got 11 freaking targets in this New Orleans Saints offense, and he looks like the only guy that Spencer Rattler is comfortable throwing to other than Chris Olave. He had a 24% team target share, and he dominated the snap count at tight end for New Orleans. Go pick up Jawan Johnson right now and drop whatever tight end you have. That was a bum last week. Now let's talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars and this Tank Bigsby trade and what it actually means for fantasy football, because I see a lot of people getting this one wrong. Travis Etienne is the clear number 1 back. We saw it in the game. He took most of the snap counts. He took most of the carries. But there was someone in this game that came in, and you see that third name there, LaQuint Allen Jr. He was the primary passing back. If we look at his target share, he had 3.2% of those targets. And I think he's actually going to take that load off of Travis Etienne. And Travis Etienne is pretty much going to be Every now and then he'll catch a screen pass, but he's going to be a primary running back. Bashal Tutin is the handcuff because obviously Bashal Tutin is more of the clear and better runner than LeQuint Allen Jr. is. But LeQuint Allen Jr. is the pass catching back and will play the third down and long rolls in this offense, and it won't be Bashal Tutin. Pay attention to that. Tank Bigsby, he moves on to Philadelphia. He's probably going to play that A.J. Dillon role. Will Shipley, we don't know if this injury that he has is serious, but if they're moving to Tank Bigsby, this could be something to keep an eye on with Will Shipley. So just pay attention to what's going on in the backfield in Philadelphia for your handcuff situation if you have Will Shipley or Tank Bigsby. Saquon's obviously the guy there. We'll talk about that later in this video. Now for Jacksonville, as far as wide receiver goes, the snap counts, Brian Thomas Jr. obviously dominated. Dyami Brown, somebody I was pretty high on in this offseason. I'm a Washington fan. I saw how he played in Washington at the end of the season. He was starting to pick things up and understand the NFL game and how it rolls. Travis Etienne played 63% of the snaps, and they just kept on targeting him, peppering him with these short, intermediate passes, which you can see in this wide receiver room. Travis Hunter dominated the team target share, 25%. Like that's pretty good out of Travis Hunter, who only played 60% of the offensive routes from the wide receivers. Brian Thomas, obviously, right next to him at 22%. That's a good number. His catch rate was horrible. I don't know where the connection was gone from Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas from last season, but we'll see what happens. Brian Thomas Jr. should have better weeks than what he had this week in fantasy. Keep him in your starting lineups. Don't lose hope right away. And then Dyami Brown, he's a good little waiver wire pick. If you're in a deep fantasy league, like 14 teams, 12 teams, something like that, and Dyami Brown's out there, you might as well go pick him up. He had a decent week. If there's similar matchups to Carolina and Travis Hunter is known to not be used in the wide receiver room, Dyami Brown automatically becomes like a fringe flex start. So if your team's pretty deep with injuries and you need a guy off the waiver wire, Dyami Brown would be a good pickup for a favorable matchup week to week. And let's talk about the running back room in Carolina. It was dominated by Chuba Hubbard. Rico Dowdle played little to no role in this offense other than the third down and long rolls, the pass blocking rolls. Chuba Hubbard is the guy. Rico Dowdle, for anybody who drafted him, handcuff if you have him with Chuba Hubbard. If not, honestly, there's better running back options out there, more than likely in your league. So go ahead and drop Rico Dowdle. If Trey Benson's available, pick up a Trey Benson. Now, looking at the wide receiver room, obviously, Ted McMillan, Xavier Legette were the two. Hunter Renfrow got signed back to the team, and he saw 65% of those snaps out of the slot. So the only problem with this is that Bryce Young is just so inaccurate that and makes the worst decisions I think a quarterback has made in the past 10 years of the NFL. It is insane to watch this man play football. We all thought he figured it out in the last 3 weeks of last season. We thought he had hope. We thought Ted McMillan was going to have hope. But I want you to look at this number right here. I'm about to pull up their target share. Look at all of these numbers for catch percentage. 55.6% for Ted McMillan, 42.9% for Xavier Legette, and 33% for Hunter Renfrow. And then you have 0 and 0 for Tremaine and David Moore, who did get snaps. If we look back, 30% of the team snaps and 18% of the team snaps. They both got 0 targets. So we're just peppering these guys, and then we're still not able to produce catch rates for them. Is absolutely insane. 55% catch rate for the number one receiver is awful. Same thing with like Brian Thomas in this game. We don't know what happened. Hopefully things get better, because if they don't, we're going to have to be real worried about this Panthers offense, and you might not be able to start a single player other than Chuba Hubbard on this offense. Now let's look at Houston versus LA, a very defensive matchup. We knew that going into this game that this was going to be one of the hardest games for Houston this season, being that the Rams defense was so good. Looking at that running back room, Nick Chubb dominated. He had 50% of the team snaps, but if we go to the rushing attempts and the carries, Nick Chubb dominated that as well. He had 62% of the carries. And then the rest of them were pretty much split up between Dameon Pierce, Woody Marks, and Dare Ogunbowale. So expect for that to kind of be the case until Joe Mixon comes back. And once Joe Mixon comes back, it probably will be like a 50-50 backfield, because Nick Chubb looked pretty damn efficient when he did get to run the football against this tough Rams defense. And then if we're looking at targets, Dare Ogunbowale, he had 7.4% of the team's target share. I don't expect that to continue because he fumbled on a screenplay against the Los Angeles Rams. I don't know if he provides that much difference between, a Dameon Pierce in the backfield on those passing downs. I think Dameon Pierce is a better pass blocker, and their offensive line is horrible. So expect Dameon Pierce to probably get more passing attempt looks and play designs for him because Wale is just a smaller guy and he's not good at pass pro. So we'll see what happens. That backfield's a little sketchy. Nick Chubb is the clear guy there, so just start Nick Chubb whenever you have the chance. Now, looking at the wide receiver room, Nico Collins was the clear number one receiver, but he didn't get a lot of share because they doubled him and tripled him pretty much every chance they got and let Xavier Hutchinson, Justin Watson, and Jaden Higgins play that number two wide receiver role for the rest of the game and just had them on one-on-one coverage and just shut down the Houston offense. As you can see here, Nico got 18.5% of those team target shares. Jaden actually got the second most, and then literally everybody else was split at 2 targets apiece for the rest of the wide receiver room. So it looks like Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins are going to be the 2 wide receivers that CJ Stroud's going to like to throw to, being that they're bigger targets. And, that offensive line's bad. So Jaden Higgins is a deep bench stash, and Nico Collins is the number 1 receiver. He just got played against a terrible defense. So that's a bad week 1 start. Week 2 should be a little bit easier, but we'll see how that goes. They should get the ball a little bit more often. Now let's talk about Kyren Williams and his role. Blake Corum didn't do anything. Kyren Williams had a 95% rush rate in this offense. Obviously, it called for it even more, being that they were leading the game. And if we jump to the wide receiver room now, we'll see that Puka Nacua had 63% of the team snaps. He did get like a little brush on his eyebrow, had some blood going on, so he got taken out quite a bit throughout this game. And a key thing is that Jordan Whittington was the number 1 receiver to come in when Puka was out. You'll see that with the 50% team snap rate. And Tutu Atwell played out of the slot for the 41% that he played. But as far as target share goes, this was pretty obvious. It was the Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams show, 38% and 28% respectively. So massive numbers as far as target shares go for the top 2 wide receivers in LA. Nothing really to touch on there. Now let's take a look at this Seattle and San Francisco game. This one was pretty interesting from a fantasy perspective, and Seattle especially. We had Zach Charbonnet out carry Kenneth Walker, and Kenneth Walker was awful in this game. Zach Charbonnet was clearly the better back, but both running backs were held to less than 4 yards per carry against San Francisco because this offensive line looks garbage. It looks like it's not going to produce any kind of run game for Seattle's running backs, whether it's Charbonnet or Kenneth Walker. And then looking at the wide receiver room, I don't know what happened in this game and where things went wrong, but Cooper Kupp led the team in snaps. Why did Jackson Smith-Njigba not play 100% of the snaps? That dude probably would have gone off for like 40 fantasy points if he would have played 100%. I don't understand it. Torrey Horton played that third wide receiver role, and then Cody White was the only other wide receiver to play snaps. It looked like they wanted to be run efficient because if we look at the team snaps from the tight end look, I mean, we had all 3 tight ends play, and A.J. Barner played 84% of the snaps. So you're telling me that A.J. Barner played more snaps than Jackson Smith-Njigba when Jackson Smith-Njigba is your best player on the team and was absolutely torching that San Francisco secondary. Didn't make sense to me. Jackson Smith-Njigba is a must start every single week in fantasy. Doesn't matter what defense he plays against. Sam Darnold, that is the only guy he'll throw to, and you can see that in the target share numbers. 56.5% of the targets went to Jackson Smith-Njigba. JSN was a target machine. He's a must start, like I said, going forward. Cooper Kupp, 13% target share. Awful in this game. He has no separation anymore. He is not the quick, athletic, gadget guy that he used to be in LA. Do not start Cooper Kupp probably ever this season unless JSN goes down. Now let's move on to San Francisco in this game. Christian McCaffrey dominated the football. Once George Kittle got hurt, it was Christian McCaffrey and Brian Robinson touching the football majority of the time. Brian Robinson's 30% carry rate, which is kind of crazy because he just got to San Francisco like 2 weeks ago. So not a crazy amount of time to sit down and learn a new playbook and a new play style. But he was mainly used for like short down yardage if they wanted to get like 4 yards and make it like third and short or second and medium, like they didn't use him for a lot of crazy plays. So not worried about Brian Robinson taking more away from Christian McCaffrey, more so just something to keep an eye on and that he is the clear second back and handcuff from Christian McCaffrey. Now let's talk about the obvious thing. George Kittle got hurt in this game. He was on pace to have a crazy game against Seattle, and San Francisco probably would have beat Seattle by 10 points if it wasn't for George Kittle getting hurt because he took a lot of that offense away once he got hurt. You can see it from the efficiency rating, 98%. He was absolutely insane for majority of that game when he did play. Now, Luke Farrell and Jake Tonjes scored the touchdown. this is a 50-50 tight end room. There's other people that I would much rather take, like a Jawan Johnson, like a Harold Fannin, even Jonnu Smith or Pat Fryermuth if they're available. They're a good enough duo in Pittsburgh that I think you could pick one of them up in your waivers and if they're available and put them right into your starting lineup. So if you have George Kittle, look for those four guys in your waiver wire. Even Hunter Henry's a great option out of New England. I didn't even mention him earlier. He saw a big amount of target shares. He probably got an 18% target share there in New England. So another good option off the waiver wire if George Kittle's hurt. Make sure you look for those five guys. One of them's got to be available in your league. Throw them into your starting lineup for George Kittle. Now, as far as wide receiver team snap goes, we have 84% for Ricky Pearsall. Juwan Jennings just got hurt, and it looks like he's going to be out for a couple weeks. So the next two were Russell Gage Jr. and MVS. They just signed Kendrick Bourne. Ricky Pearsall is getting all the looks here. So it's going to be the Christian McCaffrey, Ricky Pearsall show. Brock Purdy had a small injury coming out of practice on Monday. So we'll see what happens with this San Francisco team. If Mac Jones is a starting quarterback, we probably can't rely on anybody except for Christian McCaffrey. But if Brock Purdy's there, Ricky Pearsall becomes a nice little flex option for this week. And moving on to Tennessee versus Denver, there's not much to talk about on Tennessee's side of the ball. That Denver defense is so tough to play against. I don't care what offense you throw out there. Philly's going to struggle against Denver because Denver's so good on defense. Calvin Ridley played a majority of the snaps. Alec Ayamaner was the next team snap leader at the wide receiver position. And then Tyler Lockett came in third place. But as far as target share goes, we know who's going to lead this one. It's Calvin Ridley, 28.6%. But Alec Ayamaner did come close at 25%. So Tyler Lockett, even though he played a lot, did not produce at all and have a good target share. So it's Alec Ayamaner. It's Calvin Ridley. If Alec Ayamaner's on your waiver wire pool and you're in a deep league, he's a great option to throw in there. They will play against softer defenses. They're not going to play against one this week against Houston, but they're going to play against softer defenses throughout the season. Calvin Ridley and Alec Ayamaner are going to be better options as the season goes on and Cam Ward gets more comfortable in an NFL offense. As far as the running back room goes, this one was pretty clear. Tajay Spears is hurt. There's no good backup option. Tony Pollard ran majority of the plays. He had majority of the rushes, majority of the targets out of the backfield. Tony Pollard's a good start for majority of the year as long as they're playing those soft defenses as we talked about. All right, now something pretty interesting out of the Denver side of the offense. Tyler Beatty didn't get any rush attempts, but if we look at his target share in this offense, he was the lead target getter in that backfield by a good majority, and J.K. Dobbins was actually second. So R.J. Harvey, who we thought was going to play the pass-catch role out of this backfield, didn't even get that. He played majority of just a backup running back and running plays. So you can see that in this rush attempt share, we had 27% for R.J. Harvey, and we had 72%, about 73% for J.K. Dobbins. So J.K. Dobbins is a clear workhorse running back in this offense. R.J. Harvey's just pretty much that backup running back. And Tyler Beatty is clearly the pass-catching back. So we'll see what happens throughout the season, but it looks like this might be here to stay with how much work Tyler Beatty actually got in the pass game. Now moving over to wide receiver snap count and target share. So something pretty interesting. Obviously, Courtland Sutton's the number one. Troy Franklin, Trent Sherfield, and Marvin Mims all shared the team snap percentage for that number 2 wide receiver role. Troy Franklin obviously playing out of the slot, Marvin Mims playing a little bit out of the slot, and Trent Sherfield actually played a little bit of that outside wide receiver role. And as far as target goes, Courtland Sutton obviously led it. Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims pretty much had similar numbers, 15 and 10%. So we don't know who's going to be that number 2 wide receiver. I thought going into the season that Marvin Mims, being that he was a gadget style player, was going to get more of those players. And Troy Franklin was just like that deep ball guy that they could use on go routes. But it looks like they're going to use Troy Franklin a little bit more than we expected heading into the season. So be on the lookout. If one of them goes down, the other one becomes like an immediate flex option. Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin. We'll just see what happens throughout the season and how things work out with Bo Nix. And then we'll move on to the Detroit-Green Bay game where Micah Parsons made a huge difference. And there's 2 new coordinators in Detroit, and it is really showing right now. David Montgomery is still annoying for Jahmyr Gibbs owners in fantasy. He had 11 carries to Jahmyr Gibbs' 9. And if we look at the target share between running backs as well, Jahmyr Gibbs completely dominated it, but David Montgomery still got 10% of the team target share with four receptions. I mean, David Montgomery's still there and still taking away from what Jahmyr Gibbs can ultimately do in fantasy, which is very annoying and very frustrating. But if you're a David Montgomery owner, you love to see it because this is one of the tougher defenses they're going to play all year, and David Montgomery played really well against one of the tougher defenses. So if you're a Demont owner, be happy. Now, as far as wide receivers go, obviously Isaac Tesla didn't play as much as people wanted him to, but he did make an insane catch in this game. So maybe that boosts him up a little bit. We don't know what that's going to look like. But Khalif Raymond was the number 3 wide receiver. They played a tough defense. New coordinators. They're going to get off to a slow start. The season will pick up. Amon-Ra's going to get more targets. Jameson Williams going to get more gadget plays. They'll figure it out as the season goes on. Jared Goff is too good of a quarterback to not figure it out. So expect better weeks out of them, and don't just lose out on Jameson Williams right away. Don't be so upset that Amon-Ra didn't play and you wasted, or feel like you wasted a first round or a late first round or an early second round pick. Take time. It's going to be okay. Detroit's going to figure it out. So something out of this Green Bay backfield that I want you to pay attention to, Josh Jacobs is the clear number 1, but it wasn't Emmanuel Wilson taking passing role. It was Chris Brooks who came in on this third down and pass protection plays. So be on the lookout for that. It's not something major. Josh Jacobs is the clear workhorse in this backfield. But now looking at snap count, Jaden Reed came in and he has a fracture in his foot. It looks like it doesn't matter though. He played 37% of the snaps, but look at his target share in 37%. 22.7% of the team's target share in 37% of the snaps is absurd. Jordan Love is like only comfortable throwing to Jaden Reed, it seems like. And Romeo Doubs had a pretty good target share too at 18.2%. The one that we're disappointed about is this guy right here, Matthew Golden. What happened? He was supposed to be the guy coming out, and he played the second most snaps out of the wide receiver room, but it was just so spread out that, even when Christian Watson comes back, this Green Bay wide receiver room is almost unplayable in fantasy because you have no idea who's going to have a good week. From Christian Watson when he comes back to Jaden Reed to Romeo Doubs. Dontavian Wicks was even a big part of this game and played a lot. So, I mean, it is just insane. And then you have Tucker Kraft on top of that in the tight end room. Josh Jacobs and Tucker Kraft might be the only 2 startable options in this Green Bay offense as far as positional value goes. Now, for the Baltimore-Buffalo game, that was one of the craziest games I've ever watched. It reminded me immediately of the Kansas City-Los Angeles Rams game at the Coliseum, where it was like 54-51. Obviously not as high scoring, but I mean, it was just back and forth, back and forth. One hit, the other one punched them in the chest. One hit, the other one punched them in the head. Like, it was insane to watch. It was a great game. But something we need to pay attention to in this Baltimore offense, I think DeAndre Hopkins has taken that Mark Andrews red zone role because DeAndre Hopkins played 35% of the snaps. Nothing crazy. Like, we weren't looking for anything like that out of DeAndre Hopkins. But Mark Andrews played 74%, and Charlie Kolar, it was very run heavy for a little while. He played 60% of the snaps. And if Baltimore is looking to be that dominant on the ground and use DeAndre Hopkins in the red zone, Mark Andrews might become unplayable when Isaiah Likely comes back. So keep him in your lineup right now because obviously it's Mark Andrews, but really keep an eye on what Baltimore is trying to do in the run game because if they're trying to do that and they're using DeAndre Hopkins in the red zone, this could become a bad situation for Mark Andrews fantasy owners. Also, I have Buffalo on the screen, but Zay Flowers balled out. I wasn't high on Zay Flowers. I think this was just a perfect game script for him to go out there. They ran the ball efficiently. They ran the hell out of the football and then got Zay Flowers open. So they can do that every game. And Zay Flowers is a good little start, but I don't think he's going to have a game like he did every single week. If you owned Zay Flowers last year, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, moving on to Buffalo, we saw a 3-way split at running back. So James Cook took 56% of the snaps, and then Ty Johnson took 32.9% of the snaps, which is closer to the middle of the game. It was like they gave James Cook a break. It was really weird. Ty Johnson was in almost like every play between like the third, like halftime to the end of the third quarter, and then James Cook came in, and then Buffalo started scoring again. Yeah, ironic, right? But James Cook at the end of the day did have 76% of the carries. And as far as running back target share goes, he did have more targets. He pretty much he had more combined than Ray Davis and Ty Johnson in target share. So nothing too worried to be about a James Cook fantasy owner. So if you have James Cook, feel okay. You feel comfortable. Now in the wide receiver room, if you drafted Khalil Shakir over Keon Coleman, you are shitting bricks right now because Keon Coleman had 24% of the target share at 11 targets. Khalil Shakir had 9, but it was mainly because Baltimore's secondary was so bad. Keon Coleman was the favorite target for Josh Allen, and it was pretty clear during that game. And a situation to keep an eye on in Buffalo. So this is the target share for the tight ends, but we're going to go to the snap count. Dawson Knox outsnapped Dalton Kincaid. This has become a two-way tight end room again. So Dawson Knox has invited himself to the party. He is now one of the better tight ends on that team. Dalton Kincaid didn't take it over last year. Buffalo noticed that. So you'll see that between target share and snap counts that this is now a two-way tight end room. Dalton Kincaid isn't going to have as big of a year as we think he is. He happened to score the touchdown, which made his fantasy number pop up a little bit more. But if it's not that high score of a game, Dalton Kincaid is not getting that touchdown or that amount of targets. So just pay attention to that throughout the season. So we're talking about Chicago and Minnesota. They don't have these stats up right now on lineups.com. Shout out to lineups.com. They normally get those out like a day or two after the game's finished. They give you all the snap counts. They give you the rushing percentage, the touchdowns. They give you all these numbers. So great tool. I'm not sponsored by lineups.com, but if you want to go check out their webpage, it's actually really informative and very useful for fantasy owners. So go check them out. As far as rushing attempts goes, like I said, it doesn't show it here right now because the game just happened. I'm recording this on Wednesday in the morning, so the game happened Monday night. They're not going to get that information right out. The running back room, Roschon Johnson wasn't healthy this game. He did not play. So it was DeAndre Swift full-time in that backfield in Chicago. DJ Moore took like 3 carries, and that was about it. So it was just the DeAndre Swift show. Nothing crazy out of the backfield. Out of the wide receiver room, Rome Odunze did lead the team in targets and snaps. So just pay attention to that. DJ Moore did get hurt for a couple plays in the fourth quarter. But DJ Moore did lead the team in receiving yards. Odunze scored the touchdown because DJ Moore was out. So we'll see what happens when DJ Moore and Odunze are both like fully healthy and DJ Moore's not playing the running back role as the backup to DeAndre Swift. Now, the tight end room, this is something that's very disappointing. Kmet and Loveland, we kind of had the feeling that Kmet could, eat into Colson Loveland's split of time, and he did just that. There's no true number one there. They pretty much split snaps and targets, so Cole Kmet was the more efficient tight end, if that means anything. So if you have a Colson Loveland tight end fantasy owner, you feel very uncomfortable right now with what Ben Johnson used through Cole Kmet in this offense. And same thing for Minnesota. It's not going to be up, so we're just going to talk about it. That Minnesota running back room is going to be 50-50 this whole year. Jordan Mason had led with carries at 65% to Aaron Jones' 35%. No other running back got any carries. And Jones had more targets and a receiving touchdown, so he had the big play in the end zone, corner of the end zone. So this is a running back room by committee. Jordan Mason is a clear running back room. So if you feel like they're going to run the ball a lot more against the defense, play Jordan Mason. If you feel like they're going to have to pass the ball, play Aaron Jones. If you have both on your fantasy team. So that's the only advice I can give you as far as the Minnesota run game goes. Now, as far as the wide receiver room goes, until J.J. McCarthy gets better, this wide receiver room is not going to be good. Justin Jefferson even struggled, and that's saying a lot, being that Chicago's pass defense is okay. It's not great. Minnesota just struggled to throw the football, and that's mainly because J.J. McCarthy is not a great thrower of the football. He was drafted because he knows how to win football games, and that's what he did on Monday Night Football. So we'll see what happens with this wide receiver room. Justin Jefferson looks a little worrisome as far as like top guys. He's probably the person I'm most worried about in that top realm. I'm on Roz right there with him, being that this new offensive system didn't look good. But as far as like completely like overall like number one first round picks, Justin Jefferson worries me the most by far. All right, and moving on to the Friday and Thursday night games. We didn't really touch on these at all throughout the week, so we're going to touch on them now. Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt pretty much split snaps, and then Brashard Smith came in for a lot of the passing down work late in the game when they were down. So Pacheco and Kareem Hunt look like they're going to split goal line work even because they didn't really make themselves known to have one be the goal line back and the other one not be. They're both power backs. They both run pissed off, so it was even carries, 5 and 5 carries for both. And then as far as target goes, it was 3 and 3. So, they got a lot of screen work, each of them. Rashad Smith came in and mainly played like pass blocking, pass protection. So we'll see what that role becomes for Brashard Smith. I think it becomes more targets than Pacheco and Kareem Hunt get for Brashard Smith, but we'll see how as the season goes on, how that plays out. Now, Xavier Worthy's out. It looks like he's going to be out for a long time with this shoulder injury. They're contemplating whether to give him surgery or to have him just wait it out like 4 or 5 weeks. So Marquise Brown becomes the immediate guy who can go in there and take snaps right away and be the number one guy. He had 93% of the snaps played. Juju and Tyquan Thornton are the next two guys in that wide receiver room. Expect a lot more Noah Gray now too. So Noah Gray didn't get a lot of looks. Maybe it just wasn't in the scheme that they had planned for this game when Xavier Worthy went out. Expect Noah Gray to also get a lot more touches in this offense with Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice out. But you can see here that Marquise Brown had an insane 41% team share. And like I said, Juju Smith-Schuster, Tyquan Thornton, it kind of got shared between them. And then you saw why Pacheco and Kareem Hunt had a lot of targets as well. So, something to look at. Marquise Brown, if he's on your waiver wire, go pick him up right now and start him. He is the number one wide receiver in this Kansas City offense. And for the Chargers, the running back room was dominated by Amari Hampton with carries. He had 94% of the carries. Najee just didn't have enough time to get in with the offensive number ones and get the playbook down in actual game time. So Najee will take more of that role as the season goes on. Amari Hampton just had the full training camp and OTAs to sit down and be the number one back with the starters every single day. So expect Najee Harris to take a little bit more day by day. Now, for team snap percentage, something we need to pay attention to. Ladd McConkey, obviously number one. He didn't get as many targets as we thought he was going to get, but Quentin Johnston looks like he learned how to catch a football. So I think the Chargers are noticing that, and they played him in 81% of this game. So we'll see the target shares in a second, and you'll see what I'm talking about here when I talk about Quentin Johnston being more of a viable option than people think he is. And I know a lot of people will be like, oh, it was just 1 week. He'll bounce back to his old self and drop footballs left and right. So we'll see what happens. But Keenan Allen, he still has that rapport with Justin Herbert. There's not a single question about that. They look pretty comfortable with each other throughout the entire game. So moving on to the targets, it'll show that Keenan Allen, obviously, like I said, they had great rapport. He had the most targets. And second was Ladd McConkey. Obviously, Ladd McConkey gets open quite a bit, so you're going to do that. But then after that, you have nobody else. And Quentin Johnston got 20%. So you're telling me that Quentin Johnston isn't going to be a big part of this offense when he was that close to Keenan Allen and Ladd McConkey in target share? I just don't know how you can convince me otherwise. So if Quentin Johnston's available, go pick him up right now. All right, and let's talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, they got Tank Bigsby, so, they're going to move on from A.J. Dillon more than likely. Will Shipley's injury could be something small that they brought him in if they don't feel comfortable with what Will Shipley does. Saquon's obviously the guy there. There's no question about that. If Saquon gets hurt, then we have a different story, and we'll talk about that at that point. Wide receiver snap counts, it was dominated by Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, but Jahan Dotson played that slot receiver role majority of the time. Something here I want you to see between targets. Let's go to tight end first. Dallas Goedert had 30% of the team target share, and A.J. Brown, obviously, as we know, had just a slim 4.3%. He had one target on the game. What happened? We don't know. A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts, they're just not a match made in heaven. A.J. Brown's great for an offensive standpoint that they can use him, and they'll have to double A.J. Brown in order to, keep the offense at bay for what they think, but Saquon then is just going to take over. They doubled down on Saquon. They doubled down on A.J. That left Devontae and Jahan Dotson pretty open for majority of the time, so that's why they got that 13% target share. But Dallas Goedert was the guy who benefited the most, as we can see. So just keep an eye on that as the season goes on. A.J. Brown should get more targets. We'll see what happens. Just stay calm, A.J. Brown fantasy owners. It's going to get better than what it was in week 1. All right, and let's talk about our final team, the Dallas Cowboys, and probably the biggest winners in any fantasy football draft was Javonte Williams fantasy owners. So we didn't know what the running back room was going to look like. Jaden Blue was out in this one. We didn't know whether it was going to be a three-headed monster, if Javonte was going to take the role, if Miles Sanders was going to have more of a role. Miles Sanders did have somewhat of a role, especially in the passing game, but Javonte was like the clear bell cow, and he was obviously the most efficient in this offense. He carried the ball 79% of the time, and his target share was actually higher than Miles Sanders too, and Miles Sanders did fumble the football. So when Jaden Blue comes back, let's see if Jaden Blue takes a lot of that pass game. That's where he's explosive at, is the pass game, those screen plays, the wheel routes. That's Jaden Blue right there. So let's see if when he comes back, this offense becomes a little bit more pass heavy. We'll wait and see what happens when we see a healthy Jaden Blue. But if you have Javonte, he clearly is a must start in this offense. And as far as tight ends go, Jake Ferguson shared 17% of the targets, so that's a great number for a tight end. So if you have Jake Ferguson, feel comfortable starting him week to week, as this offense is going to be pretty pass heavy as they go along. And then CeeDee Lamb, obviously the drops are very worrisome, but it's CeeDee Lamb. I'm not worried about it. He still had a pretty damn good game, and that was with a 40% target share, 38%. That's pretty high. So the one we should be worried about is George Pickens. But they did play Philly. Philly's a good defense overall. They did lose a lot of pieces, and at first they looked a little suspect, like they weren't going to be able to stop Dallas. And then they kind of picked it up in the second half once they came back from that lightning break. So keep an eye on George Pickens. He has a much more favorable matchup against the Giants this week. So you saw what Deebo Samuel, the number 2 receiver for Washington, did. Keep an eye on George Pickens. He's going to be a viable option for you this week. So I expect bigger things and a much higher outlook for George Pickens and a huge ceiling. Pay attention to George Pickens in this situation and how much of that target share he actually gets. We'll keep an eye on that as we go through. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the week 1 recap and some guys who I expect to play a little bit better. The target shares, that shows you everything that you need to know about what is going on in the offense of your fantasy players. So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on the carry totals and the target totals out of your running back rooms. The biggest advice I can give you, don't overreact and make a crazy move based off of something that you see in week 1. There were obviously some glaring things that we saw, like the Kenneth Walker situation and the Shaq Charbonnet situation. That San Francisco run defense isn't super great, but they look like they were going to struggle no matter what. So keep an eye on that. George Kittle fantasy owners, Harold Fannin, Jawan Johnson, Pat Fryermuth, Jonnu Smith, like those guys, pay attention to that. If you have anybody in the Cincinnati tight end room, don't start any of them. Go pick up a different tight end. So just keep an eye on those things. Nothing major really happened. No crazy injuries, thankfully, in week 1 other than Xavier Worthy. So, and George Kittle, obviously. So make sure you keep an eye on people who could be coming up. Watch your beat reports. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. This was a longer video, so we're going to try and condense it as much as we can, make it viewable for you. If you like this type of content, please comment below and let me know who you're starting and who you feel like you're overreacting or underreacting to in fantasy football after week 1. But other than that, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for stopping by. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Peace, dope, and love, and we'll see you guys later.